Okay. Okay, Vice Mayor Candell, I just want you to know we are live on YouTube.
Great. So should we wait for Tiffany or go ahead and call the meeting to order?
It's your call.
Can we make, sorry, everybody, can we make, our facilitator just had some computer issues. We'll wait another minute. She figures it'll take that long. So just give us one more minute and then we'll start.
And unfortunately, I didn't have the music queued up that Tiffany did, so I can't play it for you. So Tiffany, if you have come in on one of the telephone numbers that just appeared, if you could raise your hand by using *9, then I'll know that it is you. Or if you are out there, aha.
Oh, good.
Okay, hold on a second. Here we go. Okay, excellent. Let's see. Okay, very good.
All right, thank you. So we are live, right, Jeff? Thank you all.
We are live.
Great. All right. Thank you all. And welcome to all of you for Lafayette's first task force town hall meeting to affect change and action in the area of racial equality in Lafayette. So first off, we'll have, even though all 5 council members are here, I will take a roll call of our task force members. All right. As Teresa Geringer, excuse me.
Here.
And Cam Burks.
Here.
Thank you. And I am here, so we are here. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second? All right, good.
Second.
We're adopting the agenda. All right, now we come to public comments. Now these are comments for items not on our agenda tonight. So if you have a public comment, please raise your hand in the Zoom meeting, or press *9 if you're on the phone, but this is for items not on our agenda. So Jeff, do we have any items for public comment?
There is one hand raised, Vice Mayor Candell, and that's Vivian McHenry, and she'll be joining the meeting now.
She's okay.
Go ahead, what was that?
Hi, Vivian, your item is on the agenda. So why don't you wait for the public comments that's coming up next?
All right, I'll lower all the hands and we'll try it again.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay,
right, so now.
Yeah, this is agenda. This is for something that's not on the agenda. If you have a public comment, use the raise your hand function or *9. No hands raised at this time.
Okay, super. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. So now I will pass this on to our wonderful, we actually hired a professional facilitator, Tiffany Wong, and she is on your screen, and I'd like to introduce her. She's already helped us so very much. So thank you, Tiffany. You can take it from here.
Wonderful. Good evening, everybody, and the City of Lafayette. My name is Tiffany Hong. I am the co-founder at Circle Up Education and also honored to be your facilitator and moderator for this evening on tonight's town hall on racism and discrimination. And so as you all know, today we are here to talk about racism and discrimination, to surface different stories that may be and experiences that residents, businesses, visitors may be experiencing in Lafayette. And the City Council Task Force came together and wanted to provide this listening session for today and even put out a survey before this evening. And we received a lot of different comments, people sharing their personal experiences related to race, and racism, different experiences related to what they have seen their colleagues or their neighbors experience related to police and schools specifically, and also stories around discrimination around religion, sexual orientation, and even gender identity. And so we know that today's topic is very uncomfortable for many, and which is why we are taking the time to do it and lean into it together. And there have even been comments around why talk about racism if it's not a problem here. And so today we're here to address it, to see if there are issues out there, and if so, how we can be better together to address the issues that exist. And so today's town hall, we have a couple of key components. We're going to start off by a welcome address by our task force chair, Vice Mayor Susan Kendall. We are going to do some introductions of the task force members and the City Council. After that, the task force members will stay on the screen and we will do a brief overview of defining key terms related to racism and discrimination, how we can set the context for this evening. And then we'll take public comments for the rest of the evening, where people will have the opportunity to come on screen, share their stories, and share their suggestions and experiences with the task force members and the rest of the city who's watching tonight. And then afterwards, we will do our closing. So I will go ahead and pass it over to Vice Mayor Kendall to share her introduction of tonight's town hall.
All right, thank you, everybody. So first off, why are we here? We are here because our city council is united in our view that we must do everything we can to fight systemic racism in our city. There's been a national and literally global response to the murder of George Floyd and so many other Black men and women in our country. And there's been an unparalleled uprising to act and work together to end injustice. We have three major efforts going on in our city right now. The first being the schools as they work with the parents and the students. The second effort is being handled by our public safety subcommittee, where council members Burks and Bliss are working on racism as involved with policing in our city. And lastly, we have this task force, which is working on issues around systemic racism in our broader community. So our first task force meeting was a couple weeks ago, and we had a pretty lofty agenda, but we literally scrapped it all. It was very clear that we needed to listen first before action. Thank you to the many people who attended, who helped redirect our efforts. So tonight is for listening. And at the end of the meeting, we will talk about possible future actions, but please know we will take every action back to a full vote of council. Our plan is that staff and myself will meet in 2 weeks to review what our facilitator, Tiffany, is going to create for us, and then we will bring back to the full council in 3 weeks. This process will take time, but we promise we will have possible actions to pursue in the near future. So I truly want to thank all of you who are preparing to share tonight. We have all the stories that have been submitted so far as part of our agenda on our website now. They're really great, and we encourage everybody to enter. They're they're very helpful to us. So please continue to contribute. So I do want to share with you my personal reasons why I'm so passionate about this topic. I have 3 Black nephews, as my sister married a man from Mali in West Africa, and they identify as Black. My nephews did live here in Lafayette for about 3 years, about 7 years ago. And they came over to my house after school because my sister was working full time and I wanted to help out. And I want to share this with you because this is where I failed with them, with my own racism. My racist failure is I thought that when they left my front door, their experiences would be the same as my own children. I simply didn't understand how different their daily lives were in so many ways. When things were happening to them that now we would clearly know they're racist driven, I really didn't listen, or I really didn't understand. So they simply stopped telling me their stories. It's only far more recently do they now tell me. And it's not that they changed, but that I'm starting to change and I can start to understand and feel for them. I really feel awful because their stories are terrible. I hope that they're on and they can tell you something, some of them. I've got my tissues ready because it's awful. They eventually moved away from Lafayette to Berkeley, both through the massively rising rents, as well as to leave this place that treated them pretty badly. I hope that they're here, and please realize that talking about their experiences is very traumatic. All the people who are willing to talk are extremely brave, and I want to thank all of you in advance for sharing with us. Please, I know that so many of us don't think that we're racist, but racism is a multifaceted and really complicated issue. I would have sworn over and over back then when the boys were here that I wasn't racist. So now I hope that you will join me in my journey. I've just started, and I know this is uncomfortable, but it's so important for all of us to try to build a better community for all of us and not just some of us. And I know we can. So I hope you can all listen to what our great facilitator Tiffany is going to say. She's already teaching me a lot. So we're here to learn, we're ready, and thank you all very much for coming and attending and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Mayor Kendall, for sharing your personal story, connection to this work, and our intentions for this evening. I'm going to go ahead and take my time in introducing each of the council members so that they can also make their own statements and also share with you their personal connection to this work, as I think it's important as you learn more about your city leaders and our intentions for growth for this evening. We'll start with Council Member Geringer.
So thank you, Tiffany, and thank you, Vice Mayor Kendall, for opening up and for kicking us off on this work. I know I'm supposed to talk about my personal connection to this work in about 90 seconds or less. And so in another time and place, I'll be happy to share in more depth my experiences in high school and college, where I first recognized the disparities between me and my classmates and the juveniles and youth that I had the honor and was humbled to work with and mentor in our local detention facilities. But while I recognized the disparities, I didn't really understand that while I thought I had overcome struggles, again, another story for another time, that I also had opportunities that others did not. I took classes in college, and throughout my life, I've worked to understand race, inequality, the cycle of poverty, and all of the issues surrounding social justice. And all of the work that I've done in education, city, county, regional, and state policymaking, and the task forces that I've served on has really come out of that desire to help solve problems and to help lift up others. What I didn't recognize until just a few years ago, that on the subject of race and systemic racism, I had a lot of blind spots. It wasn't until an encounter with my almost now 25-year-old daughter a few years ago, we were having a discussion about issues and racism, issues of racism at our college. And in that discussion, the issue of privilege, white privilege, came up. When she saw the look on my face, and before I could begin to defend myself and espouse all my years of educating myself and treating others like I wanted to be treated, she stopped me and she said, "Mom, I know that you have worked hard. I know that you've overcome what seemed like insurmountable barriers and struggles, and no one is discounting that. But none of those were because of the color of your skin." So my connection to this work is that I thought I was doing the right thing. I realized that there's so much more to see around this topic, and I hadn't seen it before. So while it is overwhelming, uncomfortable, causes feelings of guilt and responsibility, it has allowed me to see areas where I can help make change. And so tonight, I want to thank everyone in advance, as Vice Mayor Kandel did, who either has or will share your stories. Your courage and your openness to share your experiences of racism and discrimination of any kind inspire me. And while race and systemic racism is at the forefront, I want to make sure that all who have experienced discrimination, prejudice, and any sense of not belonging or otherness have a chance to have your voices heard. My hope tonight and in this work as we continue to do it, because we know it's not going to, be done one and done in a couple of months. I hope that by hearing our stories, your stories, and truly listening to one another, that we can validate individual experiences, acknowledge our discomfort, and then do something really good with what we learn. So I want to thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Councilmember Geringer. And next up, I'd like to introduce Councilmember Burks.
Thanks, Tiffany. And thanks to Vice Mayor Kandel. Thank you for your leadership. And to Teresa, thank you for your words and your leadership. And the mayor, thank you very much for being here and leading the charge on this, as it was a vote of all 5 of us that created this committee. So it's great to see Councilmember Bliss as well. I'll keep it really, really short. As a child, I grew up in a household where we talked about race a lot. My father was from the South, grew up in a very racist environment. And it was something that he and my mom taught my brother and I a lot about. And it was almost nightly at dinner. I can still picture our little tiny kitchen in San Francisco. And then down in Burlingame, where I went to high school, where we would talk about different issues and experiences that he had. And it really resonated with me in college, where I decided to study sociology and race relations. And then I joined the Foreign Service, really to go into different cultures and to understand different parts of the world and different perspectives, and to really see and to experience tolerance. And I'm encouraged by the number of comments that we've seen tonight. I want to thank everybody in town for engaging tonight. Courageous is the right word, Susan. And it starts here. When this movement and when these tragic events started, I personally felt that there was an impetus for us to dive in headfirst to help our town out. As I've seen over my 10 years in Lafayette, a fairly swift undercurrent of racism in our town that I think we can course correct. And even if it's just changing the views and tolerance of a few, I think we've done our job. So I'll stop there. I just really want to thank the community for engaging in this like you have. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Burks. Councilmember Bliss, please begin.
Thank you, Tiffany. I want to echo the thanks to the Vice Mayor for chairing this group, and also to Councilmembers Geringer and Burks for also being on the task force, and of course to the Mayor for his leadership on this front. And also I want to thank Tiffany for all the great work in facilitating tonight, and for, I had a chance to talk with Tiffany in advance of the event and just think a little bit about my personal story and how it relates to the work that we're embarking on this evening and beyond. And my quick sort of personal narrative is I grew up in an area actually of Cleveland, Ohio, very far from here in many ways. And very ethnically diverse and very racially diverse, but not at all integrated. And by virtue of growing up where you had a lot of different racial and ethnic groups close to one another and in contact with each other, but not very integrated, you just unfortunately wind up witnessing a lot of person-to-person individual racism. And it was the type of thing, as a young person, it was hard to process. I knew it was wrong. And I think what was particularly painful was it was often people that I, in my own view, thought of as very open-minded and progressive people, and yet they would articulate views that I knew were wrong and were racist. And I think for many years, it was confusing to me, and I also bore a lot of just individual guilt to not stand up in those moments and say something, and to stand up for what I knew was right. And so I think over the years, it's something that I'm still very much learning about and trying to name and understand my own implicit biases, which I think is an important part of this work. I also think that over the years, I've come to really become a bit of a student of structural racism and the way that public policies over the years have contributed to structural racism and to certain groups not being included and even allowed to live in certain communities. And even in the way that as a community we are as Lafayette, we still in a lot of ways manifest the legacy of a lot of those policies and policy choices. And so as policymakers, we clearly need to do better moving forward. I know all my colleagues on council are committed to that. And I think a lot of that begins tonight with this discussion and this dialogue. And I just want to thank all the people that are here this evening, all the people watching online, and in particular, all the people that have already shared their personal stories with us, and also those people that will be sharing those stories and bearing witness this evening. So I want to thank everybody. There is probably no more important work that we do as policymakers than what we're continuing this evening. So thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Councilmember Bliss, and all of you that have shared so far. It's neither easy to talk about or easy to hear. And last but not least, Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Tiffany. This is really an important discussion. I'm glad we're having it. And the task force has been put together to dig into this and come back with this good recommendation of what we can do. I have 4 ideas or thoughts about what I experienced when I first moved to Lafayette and bought a house. I was looking through the CC&Rs and I noticed that it had been struck in 1954 that they couldn't sell that house to a person of color. It was just interesting to see that in writing and then to see it struck out with a 1954 date on it. I thought that was interesting. We had a great time when we first got here. We associated with a lot of different businesses. Everyone was very happy to see us, but I did notice there was one cashier at one of the stores who would never hand me my change to my hand. He would always put it on the counter and let me pick it up. So, okay, I checked it out. I understood where that was coming from, and it was interesting. And I wasn't surprised. Then I had an interesting situation where I had been on the council for 4 years, been reelected, and I was becoming the mayor in the coming year, first time. And Carol Frederici, I ran into her at the Taste of Lafayette, which of course, if you know it, it's a great evening being out and seeing folks and having a lot of little tastes from all the different restaurants. But she grabbed a hold of me and said, "Oh, I want you to meet someone." So she takes me over to some gentleman and says, "Oh, I want you to meet Mike Anderson. He's going to be your next mayor." And the guy looked at me and said, "How did that happen?" So that was interesting. I actually used that line a few times. It was very interesting to kind of use that. And the last is kind of a personal thing. I was, one time I was jogging. I used to run in the morning up Acalanes Road under Highway 24 heading up the hill. And there was a black guy who was a tow truck driver who was sitting on the road there. And he saw me coming up the hill. I was puffing away. He said, "Oh man, it's great to see some color out here." And I ran up to him and I went past him. I said, "It's better than that. I'm the mayor." And he looked at me. So, you know, it's a big issue. Tonight, people are going to share some very personal experiences. They're not going to be funny. They're going to be cutting to the chase. They're going to be very emotional. And all of you who do that, thank you. It's important. And your feelings will be guarded by this task force. They care. And so thank you for sharing your thoughts and your concerns with us.
Thank you, Mayor Anderson. Thank you for the laugh. We all needed that, I think. All right, everybody. So we're now going to say bye-bye to Councilmember Bliss and Mayor Anderson as they witness the rest of the event off screen. And we will stay on the panel with our task force for change. And so in this next part, before we open up to public comment, you know, a lot of the stories that the council members and the mayor and vice mayor shared so far has been around their personal experiences of racism, of not only that they have experienced, but also witnessed, learned about, and have been discussing and seek to change. And today we want to welcome different stories. And we intentionally called it racism, our town hall on racism and discrimination, because we didn't want to exclude anyone, because we all have different experiences where we've been left out, excluded, or treated differently based on an aspect of who we are. But we thought it would be important to take some time to define what we mean by racism and discrimination so that we all can locate our different experiences this evening. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and you're going to see a cute little elephant come up here. And I'm going to introduce some key terms around racism and discrimination. And I put this elephant here because, of course, we got an elephant in the room. That tonight we're talking about racism and discrimination, and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable and it's hard and it's shocking. And at the same time, we can befriend it by examining it and being with it. And so when we talk about racism, what is racism? There's so many theories, there's so many ideologies, labels, and big words and terminology that people throw around when they're trying to talk about racism, like oppression, like structural racism, like systemic racism. And so it's like, what do all of these things mean? What are we actually talking about? So when we're talking about racism at its very, very essence, right? If I was to define it to my niece who is in 3rd grade, I would say basically racism is when people treat you differently based on an aspect of how you look, based on your skin color, your eye shape, lip size and shape, hair color, nose shape, hair texture, and they use all of these things to put you in a box about a race that you belong to or a group, and they treat you differently or treat you unfairly. And what oftentimes happen is that when kids are younger, you know, and especially in like kindergarten, you see them and they're walking around and they're in the yard, and at Circle Up, we do a lot of work in schools. And at that age, the kids are really comfortable with talking about their differences. They just compare themselves like, oh, my skin color is lighter and yours is darker, like, you know, dark chocolate, and there's no, you know, feelings or emotions around it. But as we go out through our life, we begin to attach aspects of our diversity and our differences with different labels and categories, and we associate aspects of our differences with positive and negative assumptions that we've learned from different social institutions, usually from our schools, our homes, the government, the media, the messages, and we begin to attach different characteristics and attributes like our hair color, our skin type, languages that we speak with, good, bad, positive, negative, capable, incapable. And usually this is something that's created and reinforced by something called stereotypes. Like how they say, you know, like, you know, for me, people see me and they see my hair, it's like black, they see my eye shape, my skin color, and they automatically put me into a box, which is like usually Asian. And then there's associations to Asians, right? Asians are good at math, Asians are bad drivers. And usually those things don't cause harm, those biases, but they do when people act on them. And so in discussing racism, there's a few aspects of it that we need to be aware of. There's explicit racism, which I think most people understand when there's prejudice and you're trying to cause harm to people. And then there's implicit racism, where it's unintentional and sometimes even unconscious. So I'd like to introduce this framework around the axis of discrimination because it helps us to kind of locate what our experiences are. So the axis of discrimination helps to highlight the relationship between bias and discrimination. Biases are like our thoughts, our beliefs, our values, and discrimination are actions that we take based on those beliefs and values. And so on the top half of the axis is the conscious realm. So the conscious realm is like what we know, we're thinking, we're aware of it, we know that it's happening. And racism can be you can have conscious biases, stereotypes, like Asians are good drivers, all Black people are dangerous. Those are conscious beliefs that people have and they ascribe to and they believe in them, and then they take action on them, which then results in conscious, explicit forms of racism, blatant racist actions that you intentionally do because you want to make somebody feel uncomfortable, inferior, or create a hostile environment. And that's usually this isn't usually what happens in our communities. Usually this is what we teach our kids not to do, right? Don't treat people differently or badly based on who they are. You want to accept them. And so I think what oftentimes happens that we don't see is the unconscious realm, that racism can be implicit. And that's when we don't realize that we have biases, stereotypes, because we've been exposed to them throughout our lives. Every time we watch Cops and we see a Black man getting arrested, we make associations in our minds like Black equals dangerous or bad. Or every time we see an Asian student on TV studying and being studious, we make that automatic associations. That's what people mean when they say they're implicit biases. And usually we don't ascribe to these beliefs on the outside. Like I think all people are, equal and capable, but I might not realize how much I've been affected by the beliefs and associations and biases that are around me. And when I don't know those things, those biases can result in unconscious, implicit forms of racism or discrimination when we're talking about exclusion or leaving people out or treating them differently based on any other aspect of who they are. And I think this is what often happens, like when you are treated differently and the person isn't meaning to cause harm, but it does still happen. And this is the most hardest part to address because our implicit biases live underneath the positive perceptions of who we are, right? We all see each other and see ourselves as good people, so there's no way we could be racist. But we don't realize that sometimes in our unconscious realm of our minds that there's biases that exist that sometimes they can influence our actions and behaviors without us even knowing. And so during the council members' sharing and introductions, you heard them talk a little bit about structural racism, internalized interpersonal forms of racism and discrimination. And so these are the different forms of racism that exist. Interpersonal racism is somebody treating another person differently or excluding them based on their race. This can come out again in implicit forms, unintentional and unconscious forms, and then explicit, where it's conscious and explicit and intentional. And then you also have internalized racism that exists. This happens when we start to believe the stereotypes or biases that exist around the race or the culture or the any aspect of our identity is the stereotypes about who we are. An example of this is, there's something called the doll study, a study that was done years ago, I think in the 1960s. Psychologists wanted to study the impact of segregation in schools. And they had done studies where they took kids, 3rd grade, 5th grade, even kids before they could even speak, and asked them to choose between two dolls, a white doll and a black doll. And the scientists would ask them, you know, which doll is good, which doll is bad, which doll is smart, which doll is dumb. And usually with the positive words, they chose the white doll, and the negative words, they chose the black doll. And what was really just sad and shocking about these studies that were done was that even the black kids and students chose the black doll and associated black doll with bad, ugly, or dumb. And I think that's what we mean when we talk about internalize, is we start to believe those beliefs and make it about ourselves and believe that's what we're only capable of. And we can also internalize positive beliefs as well. And then you find structural racism, which is why we say that racism comes with power and privilege as a system. Just like Mayor Anderson was talking about when he bought his home and found in the CCNRs that you weren't allowed to sell to people of color, of Black people, of Asian people. And racism becomes structural and systemic when biases and prejudice become woven into policies and practices, and they begin to oppress people by giving some people opportunities, but removing opportunities from others who are, and then making them more disadvantaged. We also see this with redlining and taxes in schools, where communities who are more disadvantaged have less access to resources or quality education because the tax dollars cannot be funded into the schools and the resources that they need. And so today's stories might be around any aspect of racism. And racism is the discrimination based on race, but we welcome today any time stories, experiences that you may have experienced harm due to any aspect of who you are that could have been different because of your gender, your sexual orientation, your religion. I know for myself, being a business owner, there's oftentimes I experience discrimination for my age, and people, you know, I've gone into interviews with different cities and people have asked me, you know, like, how old are you, or when did you graduate? And it's really inappropriate and really awkward and uncomfortable, but it does happen, and we want to surface those stories as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and share the next part of our presentation today, which is we're going to be moving on to taking some public comments, because at this point we want to hear your stories and we want to hear your suggestions of racism and discrimination in Lafayette and how we can work to undo and dismantle some of these practices, policies, and experiences. And so in a moment, if you don't have your hand up already, we'll be asking you all to raise your hands on the Zoom webinar to see if you want to share today. And we're welcoming all perspectives and stories. And the sharing structure is we're going to allow about 3 minutes each for each person to share, similarly following our council, city council format. We want you to share your story and experience with the task force and the community. And at this time, we won't be making responses because we want to make sure we leave as much time as possible for the community to share on this platform. And a few ground rules to make sure that your story is safe with us is that we would like you not to share any names of people or businesses. We're sharing personal stories here, and we want to make change, but we also don't want to make this a place of public shaming. And so please reserve and keep confidential the names of people involved in your stories and even businesses. And then we invite you to listen openly and with curiosity. Just knowing that the stories that people might share today might be nothing from what you've experienced or seen before at Lafayette. And some of it may come as a shock. Some may be really, really hard to believe, but we just encourage you to listen, as all of the task force members today will be doing the same with you. And so lastly, instructions for our sharing is that your name will be called when it's your turn. And we will be moving you from the audience onto the panel so that you will be able to be viewed by other people. So we want you to turn on your camera and microphone. And from there, you can please introduce your name, your relationship to Lafayette. Are you a resident, a business owner, a visitor? And sharing your story, experience, or suggestion related to what the task force can do. And some helpful sentence starters, if you like, and you don't know where to start, you can start by saying a story I would like to share today is, or a suggestion I would like to share with the task force is. And we'd appreciate if you could share your because so that we can know where it's coming from. Other than that, I will gently interrupt you when there's about 30 seconds remaining. And the Q&A box will also be open to collect additional questions. We won't be responding to the questions today, but we will take them and compile them into our recommendations and our analysis around next steps. So I'm going to go ahead and end my screen share now. And we'll go ahead and start with our first community member.
Okay. And so first up is Vivian Chang.
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome, Vivian.
Vivian, you're muted. So if you could unmute yourself, that would be great.
Hey, Vivian, you there?
Can you unmute your phone or your device?
I'm also on this end trying to unmute Ms. Chang, but that doesn't seem to be working. And I've asked her to turn her video on.
Okay. We'll maybe give it another second and then maybe we'll move Vivian back and then we'll try it again after this. And if you feel more comfortable in not showing your face, that's completely okay too.
Yes.
Whatever you're comfortable with. All right, Vivian, if it's okay with you, we're gonna move you back just to see if we can help with some tech support on the back end. And then please raise your hand again if you'd like to share and we'll elevate your place in line. All right.
All right. Next up is Vivian McHenry.
Another Vivian. Welcome,
Vivian.
Okay,
There you are.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, super. Sorry, I'm having to take this from the car, you guys. So thank you so much for this. This is a really wonderful opportunity. It's heartening. It's encouraging for Lafayette to be taking such a bold and courageous stand and really meeting the moment that is happening. So again, I'm Vivian McHenry. I'll try to avoid saying any names. I guess I can make sure I follow the rules, but
just try to do your best.
What's that?
Oh, you do your best.
Okay. Thank you. So I want to talk a story about, this is a story about Miles Hall. He's a young man that first of all, I'm the friend of Ton Hall. I won't name any businesses, but hopefully it's okay to name this, but I'm a dear friend of Ton Hall's. Her son and one thing that we didn't talk about earlier that I don't think I heard, but I want to make sure really is talked about, is that there are biases also against disabilities and specifically people with mental illness. And as some of you may know, when someone is a person of color, they are 2.5 times more likely to be shot and killed by the police. And when they have a mental illness, they're 16 times more likely. This is statistically nationwide. And so if you happen to fall into both of those groups, you almost have, or not almost, you have a double target for lack of a better word, on your back if you're both African American and someone who has a disability, specifically a mental illness. And in this case, in Walnut Creek, this young man was 23 years old. He had been there, grown up there since he was 4 years old. So gone up through the Walnut Creek School District, but shortly after graduation started to exhibit symptoms of mental illness and was eventually diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which, as some of you may know, you can be perfectly, acting like anyone else, like you normally would, but if you're in an episode, you begin to act erratically, and sometimes that condition is associated with disorder or disorientation, hallucinations, and confusion. And that is what happened on June 2nd of last year. And the family had been working with the police department, had been instructed to call whenever they needed to try to get him 5150 because he wasn't aware that he had a mental illness, which is very common, and wasn't on his meds, which is also very common. And the family thought that they could call and get that help to get him to the hospital when he was behaving erratically and outside of his normal character. But tragically, the officers who arrived were not familiar with him and were intimidated by the way that he looked and the way that he was acting, even though he had not committed any crimes or hurt anyone or even threatened to hurt anyone. And
30 seconds, Vivian.
Thanks. And thanks for that reminder. And he was shot and killed within moments in the side as he was running by, attempting to run home. So we just encourage people to be very aware of their biases, where disabilities and mental illness specifically are the issue, because those biases can be lethal. And we hope that anyone that wants to learn more about Miles will go to justiceformileshall.org and go to the Get Involved section, get involved, and learn more about us and see how you can help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you for sharing Miles Hall's name and bringing awareness of the statistics around not only African American youth and men, but also those with disabilities. And it's very tragic. And there were absolutely stories of those that were shared in the Tell Your Story. So we appreciate you elevating that today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, so next up is Conrad Brees.
Welcome, Conrad. Feel free to unmute whenever you're ready.
I apologize. I wasn't muted, but it switched me back to muted.
There you go. You're here. Go for it.
My wife, Joan Brees, and I have been residents of Lafayette for 36 years. We raised our daughter here, who now lives in Boston. And when I first read the email regarding stories in Lafayette of racism, I had to frankly say, I'm not aware of any. And neither one of us come to this party unexperienced. I went to school in Sausalito, California, from the second grade on through to high school at Tamalpais High School. I was involved in sports with Black kids, many kids all the way along the line. And my wife as well, raised in Pittsburgh, California, similar situation. So when we have been taking a class recently at LOPC on racism, and we were talking to fellow adults who had never met a Black person until they were in college, we were truly astonished, because that was not our experience at all. I think it is obviously, given that situation, it is important that the council proceed with this effort, but I have nothing to add to racism in Lafayette because I haven't experienced any. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Conrad. We appreciate your support and your words today. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we don't have any other hands raised, so I'll just remind folks that if they do want to share a story, that they can raise their hand, use the raise the hand function, or *9. And now we do have some hands raised. Okay, coming in next is Shwana.
Whew, I was like, what are we gonna do with all this time? Welcome, Shauna.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you. So my name is Shauna, and I live in Lafayette next to Acalanes High School. I want to thank you first for creating this task force and for your efforts to address prejudice and discrimination in our community. I submitted a comment about this incident that happened this past winter to my babysitter, a 19-year-old Black woman, and I will briefly recap it for the other attendees of this meeting. After my babysitter parked in front of a neighbor's house waiting for me to get home, the neighbor followed my babysitter in her car, blocked her car in at the end of my street, and proceeded to film my babysitter with her phone while interrogating her about what she was doing in the neighborhood, and said she was making sure that she wasn't up to any quote unquote funny business. Luckily, I was there in time to intervene. However, this incident, frankly, sent a chill down my spine. It was a clear case of racial profiling. It was aggressive and threatening. And I worried what would have happened if I hadn't been able to vouch for my babysitter. I was and still am incensed that in this day and age, a Black person would even need a non-Black person to vouch for their presence in a neighborhood. I just moved to Lafayette a few months before, and that incident has completely influenced my view of the experience of living here. I'm not Black, but I'm also not white. And I have to say, I don't feel completely comfortable in my own neighborhood, and I worry about the safety of Black people who visit our community. But I want to bridge this personal incident to a larger structural issue. And recently there has been a full-throated debate about development and the terraces of Lafayette. And I want us all to be cognizant of the connections between that issue and this one. I encourage the City Council to adopt an equitable development framework in their consideration of the project and of our community development in general. The city government, and perhaps only the city government, can make the fundamental structural changes to truly effect equity in measurable material ways. In the last town hall in this issue, a fellow resident noted that growing up in the Bay Area, he knew of Lafayette as a quote unquote sundowner town, which I had to Google, and I encourage you to Google if you don't know what this means. But that is a reputation that Lafayette should be ashamed of, and I'm really glad that moves are being made to change this. And I hope today's meeting will be kept in mind on August 10th when we discuss housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna, for sharing all those stories and enlightening us on all the different aspects of racism that you've encountered in Lafayette so far related to your babysitter and that experience that they had to have. And that was really unfortunate. It really shook you up, and also related to the development project that is happening right now, and even serving as a reminder for our task force and reminding us of the keys and the power that we have to truly affect change and equity here.
Thank you.
Okay, we have several people with their hands up, and I do want to remind folks, because we did get a question, we'll take them in order, and everyone that raises their hand will have a chance to speak. So here is our next speaker.
What's their name, Jeff? Gigi.
Yeah.
Welcome, Gigi.
Thank you. I would like for you all to know when you go off and then you get back on, so there's a little delay for the speakers. So we might need to just be a little patient with them as they're joining. So I'm Gigi Crowder. I'm the Executive Director for the National Alliance of Mental Illness here in Contra Costa County. So I just want to really echo what Vivian McHenry said about bias and sharing the fact that so often individuals who have both people of color as well as living with mental illness are most likely to be shot and killed by law enforcement, and that's unfortunate. I had not had any negative experiences in Lafayette or heard of any as the director of NAMI, even though several of our members and even a couple of board members live in Lafayette. But that makes sense. Just like when we hear stories of black on black crime, well, guess what? Black people, when they're around black people, they shoot and kill black people. White people, when they're around white people, they shoot and kill white people. If you've heard the presentation from our less informed leader Barr, you will understand that that's information we need to carry with us so we are not so judgmental. But around mental illness, I wanted to share that when I first got the call around Miles Hall and what had happened to him, and it was Walnut Creek, I did not shift my passion for wanting to support the mom when I found out he was African American. We don't pick up the phone at NAMI and say, okay, but what color are you? If we do that, it's around getting language needs met or cultural needs met. Too often, African Americans get their services in the most restrictive environments, especially in this county, making up less than 13%, but too often the family members who have loved ones who live with mental illness have to fail first. And that's what happened with Miles. Sadly, I thought, okay, Walnut Creek, I won't hear many stories like this, but I got a call from a public defender because he had a young man who'd shown up at a residence in Lafayette that his grandmother used to live in. Since his grandmother lived there, he was a little lost, living with schizophrenia. He kind of lost his way, but he knew he could go back to where his grandmother used to live. Well, sadly, she'd moved, and the residents did what most residents would do. They called law enforcement. Where it went foul is he let them know right away he lived with mental illness, yet he now has permanent scars for where the police officer mauled him. It was not a Lafayette police officer, it was a sheriff who responded. I've had great experiences with the Lafayette chief of police, but we do need to understand, because we don't hear about racial incidents, lots of times there's so much shame around it, people don't share it. And then there's microaggressions. Those incidents where individuals who live and work in Lafayette who are not white Americans may have these little incidents where they're like, was that racist? And they don't know for sure, so they don't share it. So I know we all carry implicit bias, and many people also carry racism, or we wouldn't have the president we have now. Sorry, that's just the truth. And so we need to be aware of that, but I do applaud Lafayette for having a conversation like this. And I will say that that was the first incident of the young man who'd been mauled really by a police dog. And let's keep it that way. We don't want to hear any more stories about individuals in Lafayette who live with mental illness being treated unfairly because of the color of the skin. We can't criminalize mental illness, and we can't criminalize skin color. So I appreciate you all for doing this. And NAMI is available for anyone who lives in the city of Lafayette who needs support services. We're there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next up is Jeremy Levine or Levine. Hey, Jeremy, you're on, so go ahead and speak.
Welcome, Jeremy.
Good evening. Good to
Good
see all of
evening.
you. I've spoken with many of the people on this Zoom, so I'm glad to see you in person, or over Zoom at least. So I'm Jeremy. I am coming from Laurel Drive. I grew up in Lafayette, born and raised pretty much, and my family lives there now. Well, first I wanted to say thank you very much to the council for the efforts that you're making in setting up this task force, all of the community members who are taking part in this conversation. It needs to happen. My whole life, it didn't happen, and now it is, and that's, well, I'm glad. I have an experience I'd like to share in a sense, and a suggestion about how Lafayette can strive to address specifically the institutional side of racism. The experience is actually pretty short. my entire life, I did not experience very much explicit racism. I also didn't experience almost any diversity. The community is over 80% white. Lafayette is 1% African American in a county that is 9% African American, even a state that's like 6% African American. We are disproportionately a very white community. And that's my experience. I didn't experience a lot of racism. I saw the lack of diversity. My suggestion is that, well, there are a number of factors why this lack of diversity is the case in Lafayette. Many different areas that Lafayette needs to think about deeply how to address, but one of them maybe looms over all of the others, and that is housing. And I bring up housing not to say that Lafayette hasn't made a lot of progress building housing in terms of gross units. We've built a lot of housing, but the community's conversation around housing development, I have, especially in the past few months, come to see is riddled with quite explicit racism. People saying, we don't want Lafayette diversified. We don't want low income housing that could potentially make our community more accessible. And that conversation is complicated, but people who aren't really willing to recognize that, well, Lafayette and communities like it across the United States are founded on a set of racist policies that have led to the current demographic makeup, the current socioeconomic makeup. Those policies have already been mentioned: redlining, housing covenants, the list goes on. The question becomes, how do we fully fulfill our commitment to right the past wrong that still resonates today in housing? And there are a number of ways that will have to be done. I think the general plan conversation is really, to some extent, outside the scope of this group. But in whatever way this group can think about the ways in which
30 seconds, Jeremy.
Thank you. The ways in which Lafayette can be more open to housing, the ways in which we can utilize state resources and city resources and community activism, and really change the conversation to be accepting. That will be very key in this task force. The conversation, maybe more than anything. Thank you for your time and for your commitment to addressing this issue.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for highlighting the racism and the legacy around structural racism around housing and redlining, and yeah, this commitment to making right a history that was wrong today. Thank you for your share and your suggestion.
Okay, we have one more speaker with their hand up, so I'll remind folks, if you do want to speak, please use the raise your hand function or *9. So coming in next, I believe this is Kay Mulvaney.
Welcome. Will you unmute for us?
Yeah, there I go. It takes a second. Well, hi, friends. Thank you to everybody for your efforts. I already submitted something online. And
will you share your name with us?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Karen Mulvaney. I've lived here for 33 years. I've raised my family here. And I shared an experience online on the forum, which I'll share again. And that is several years ago, my daughter, who was 25 or so at the time, and I attended an implicit bias training that was put on either by the city or the police department. I'm not sure who hosted it. There was a large group. It was held at the Veterans Hall. I think there were probably over 100 people. And we were led through the training and some activities and opportunities to give feedback and speak. And then there was a chance for people to share their personal experiences with, I believe specifically with the police. And there was a middle-aged Black man who was a fairly long-time resident of Lafayette. I happened to know him and his family. And he began to talk about an experience and/or experiences that he had had in Lafayette, being profiled by the police, being pulled over, and those kinds of things. And very quickly, there was another gentleman who sort of interrupted him and began to discount his experience, say that couldn't possibly have happened. It got into a very heated exchange. There was a deep silence in the room suddenly. It was a very uncomfortable. And it was very heated. And there were many, many, mostly white people in the room being silent, including myself and my daughter. I kept thinking in the moment, well, certainly the people that are running the workshop will say something and call out what appeared to me to be exactly why we were all there. That this was specifically racist, the discounting of the experience and the silencing of somebody else's direct experience. And really that didn't happen. Everyone remained pretty silent. And finally, the facilitator spoke about it sort of in a generic way, and things sort of moved on in that conversation. And it broke up fairly quickly after that conversation took place. And I just want to recount that. I mean, there were, a large group gathered, huge silence in the face of that, including myself.
30 seconds, Karen.
I remember saying to my daughter as we stood up, we both should have stood up and said something. And I hold that as a very specific lesson for myself. I will never let that happen again. And I would hope that our community changes in those ways, speaking up for what is the world we hope to create.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing that experience and kind of bringing that story back to life if there is any justice to be done, right? And I think, hearing about stories about racism or discrimination brings up a lot of discomfort for people because it starts to get at their own perception of themselves. And it's unfortunate that people weren't able to or ready to hold that at that moment. And hopefully that person is, out there and that you can continue sharing that story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Michael Cass.
Welcome, Michael.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for continuing this very, very important conversation. So I'm not actually going to share tonight my story, but I'm actually going to share a couple stories of a dear friend of mine who didn't feel comfortable sharing their story. So I apologize in advance. It's not as powerful as hearing from them directly, but I did want to make sure that their stories were heard. The first story that they shared was their Lafayette resident and a small business owner in Lafayette. And a number of years ago, in the middle of the night, it was between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning, they were awoken to find 2 police officers in their bedroom with flashlights shining at them. And in that moment, as they recall, they had a conversation with those 2 officers in terms of why they were there, what they were doing there. And they shared a story about that there was a cell phone that had been reported stolen, and the signal was showing that it was coming from their house. And the perception that my friend took from this, whether true or not, it's a perception and we have to give some truth to that, was honestly fearing for their life. They were woken up in the middle of the night with lights shining at them from police officers and based upon their lifetime of experience and distrust. The second story that they shared with me had to do, and this is something that I'm not going to say a specific circumstance. They've indicated that it's happened numerous times, that they've had individuals walk off the street into their place of business and make statements to the extent of, go back home, we don't want you here, go back where you came from. And those statements were quite honestly because of their nationality and the color of their skin. And the third story and the last story that I want to share is actually from a different person.
30 seconds, Michael.
There was a recent, very controversial project that was polarizing with the community. And part of those discussions actually went online and went on Nextdoor. And during a heated exchange between both sides, one individual made a statement to an African-American individual to get on the back of the bus. And I'm not going to even begin to understand what that means. But I think we all know the history behind that and the intent behind that. And again, I just wanted to make sure that you heard those stories because quite frankly, when I had a conversation with my friends earlier this week, they were in tears. And this is years after these experiences. So again, I thank the 3 task force members, as well as the other 2 council members that are here. I think this is, quite frankly, and I've said it before, probably the most important issue that you will tackle in your entire political career. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for having the courage to share those 3 stories. I can even tell with you sharing it, it required a lot of courage, you know, and even just vicariously, you could feel the shock of it and the fear and the deep trauma that it left on your friends. And the intent behind the last 2 stories is very apparent. And in the first one, just shocking to have to experience that level of violation and just traumatic experiences. So thank you for utilizing your voice today to share those stories.
Our next speaker is Mel L.
Welcome, Mel.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I am in a very awkward position with my iPad. Can you see me at all?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, I got some sunlight behind me. I want to apologize. My name is Melissa Lipscomb. And the fact that I used an abbreviated name as well as my initial for the last tells you a little something about how I feel as a Lafayette resident. I also sent in an anonymous note. And I've had a lot of people, and it's wonderful to see, have touched on a lot of points that I had wanted to talk about. I am part of an anti-racism consortium that is more national, frankly international. And I was assigned to the housing committee, which was frankly an eye-opener to me. Some people talk about structural racism, restricted covenants, as well as the background and what we're talking about in terms of New Deal, predatory loans, housing, redlining. So I guess what I'll start with is my own experience. And again, I wrote about this briefly. You know, I also know about the demographic in Lafayette. I believe it's 1% African American, and 12% Asian American. And I moved here 7 years ago from Oakland, a frankly gentrified part of Oakland, but I spent a great deal of time in downtown and uptown, and went to UC Berkeley. So I had some background in diversity. I understood moving to Lafayette was going to be quite different, to a bedroom community. I have a partner with 13-year-old twins. But from the get-go, I suppose what I'd like to say, talk about that has also been talked about are microaggressions. And I have seen them from the onset of my time in Lafayette, both implicit, and at this point, it's I'm hoping it's anachronistic, but in the context of COVID, being treated as, you know, and other I wrote about, it's quite, you see it in the news, local news. Lafayette, unfortunately, was singled out as a place where racism exists, to an Asian American woman who was blamed for COVID, was spit on. So what I went through, oh, hello. Oh,
We
I'm
lost
sorry,
you.
I lost you.
You're okay. We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see me again? I feel
30
like
seconds, Melissa.
Yeah, it's experiences of implicit bias to explicit, even in my case. And I wrote about the neighborhood I live in, my background, educational background, my, frankly, I don't know how to put it, but affluence and ability to live in this neighborhood. And that is quite something that I think education is a big part of what you're doing, which I thank you for. I think it's a huge topic, and structurally, it's something that people need to wrap their heads around, like how this happened, what happened in the New Deal, what happened with GI bills, what happened after the Fair Housing Act. And I don't know if this is enough, but I think it's a wonderful start. But again, many people, and there's the affordable housing, the very polarizing issue. It's happening here. And I think it's just a great time to discuss this. I don't have any recommendations other than continuing this conversation. I heard the
last few seconds, Melissa.
Okay. There is racism in Lafayette. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't address it, but it does exist, at least from a person of color, from my perspective. And I'm just hoping, again, that this committee moves forward with this education, because I think it's wonderful. And yeah, I just came from a housing committee meeting. I didn't expect to hear what I heard, that people would talk about institutional racism. I thought it would only be local. And so looking at it from a meta perspective is really great. And ideally, I'd love to be a part of it, and that I could talk to somebody offline about. But thank you.
Yeah.
Mel, what is the name of the consortium that you are part of?
It's the Anti-Racism Consortium. It's,
oh, okay, so that's all right.
Yeah, it's started by a woman out of USC Annenberg, journalist who I'm close to. And at this point, there's about 50 people on various committees, education, criminal justice. So it's a really wonderful group, and they have all sorts of accounts. Twitter. I'm not on Facebook, but Twitter and various social. Thank you.
Melissa.
Thank you.
All right, we have two folks with their hands up. If you do want to speak, this would be a good time to raise your hand or hit *9. Joining the meeting next is Adrian.
Welcome, Adrian.
Can you unmute yourself?
There we go. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Wanted to thank you, like everyone else has, for having this meeting. I think it's extremely important, and I am glad that the city of Lafayette has taken this up. I am not a person of color, but I was fortunate enough to grow up in Oakland in a fairly diverse community and went to high school at a very diverse high school, privileged, but also diverse. My kids attended elementary school in Oakland till 5th and 7th grade, at which time we made a difficult decision to move out here. And it is a place that I actually never wanted to move out to because of the, I guess it has a reputation of being pretty whitewashed. And from the get-go, my kids and I talked about, what we were sacrificing, education for lack of diversity, possibly, the socioeconomic discrimination. We're not extremely wealthy, all those things. And it was extremely hard for me to move out here. And I can't imagine what it would be like for a person of color. And so I'm just really glad that we're bringing this up, that it's a hard topic to talk about. We had an experience recently where my younger adult daughter has gotten very involved in the Black Lives Matter movement and wanted to put up some signs. And we put up a sign on our back fence, and a week later it had been torn down, and it was not an easy sign to tear down, and it was devastating to us. We also had an experience of a neighbor who had said, yes, I really support that movement. I'm happy to put up a sign, but a week later said she was too scared to put up the sign. On my walks, I noticed there's one sign that I've seen. And it's just, it's sad to me that it exists in this day and age. And anyway, so I guess the bottom line of what I want to say is that my daughter is working hard to help Akalani's that she graduated from. Her and my older daughter heard many stories about people of color, other fellow students experiencing blatant racism, which shocked me. I guess not, because I somewhat expected it, but in this day and age, it shocked me. And she's working hard to change the educational system so that younger kids and at Akalani's get a more realistic and truthful experience of history. And so that there's not systemic racism that continues, and hopefully our younger generation will help us with that. I'm not sure, I don't have a suggestion, but I'm just really grateful because this is all just so poignant right now, and I'm really glad that we're facing it, and I appreciate the discussion and the listening aspect of it. And I'm hoping that we're able to make some movement in the schools, at least to increase education and have some open discussion with kids as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for sharing your story and the work that your daughter is doing. And it's never easy to put yourself out there to take a position, and sometimes that comes with consequences. And I know that there's been different stories that have come up around people's Black Lives Matter signs and it getting defaced. And you shouldn't have to be scared to express yourself and support others. And good education shouldn't be separate from diversity. So thank you for sharing those points.
Okay, our next speaker is Marissa Silva.
Welcome, Marissa.
Hi. I just wanted to echo what a few people have just stated, which is that I want to acknowledge to many of us, the question is not, is racism happening here? We have heard story after story, experience after experience, documenting that it is happening here. It's had a long history here. And I worry that many people listening to this call are still doubting the actual existence of racism here in La Miranda. The protest put on by Black Lives Matter that occurred earlier this month heard example after example of Lafayette and La Miranda residents and children who have continually experienced racism here in the schools through racial profiling by police, by their neighbors, by business owners. We've seen racial slurs graffitied around Lafayette and La Miranda. There's a plethora of evidence of racism and discrimination that exists in this community. So I think the question is not, is it happening? it is happening, if you haven't witnessed it, that it doesn't give you permission to doubt the existence of it and people's experiences that have been continually shared. The question is, what are we doing about it? I'm part of various committees who are working with tackling diversity, equity, inclusion issues at the schools. I think many people are turned into this webinar to hear what the city is hoping to do about this. Thanks.
Thank you, Marissa, for sharing your sentiments and validating all of the stories that have come before you previously, that will come and have come in different avenues and platforms. I am sure the task force would love to hear about the different committees that are taking place, because at the essence, it's really looking to support all of the work that is already happening. So please do share those committees that you're a part of, either in the Q&A or other forums, because I know the task force wants to be involved in that too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Nick Warnoff.
Welcome, Nick.
Can you unmute yourself, Nick?
It's all right, thank you. Okay, by way of background, I'm an old white Jewish guy. I've seen my share of discrimination. When I graduated from law school 50 years ago, there were the firms that hired Jews and there were the firms that did not. My parents told me about past quotas at the colleges that limited the number of Jews. And we see that as an issue today, an issue of concern to some Asian Americans. My in-laws told me about discrimination against the Irish and about discrimination against the Italians. And the latter was actually the subject of a New York Times article not long ago. I've taken advantage of the shelter in place to do a lot of reading about this subject, but I'm going to heed San Francisco Mayor Breed's advice and not be a white person giving advice to Black people. But what I would like to mention, and the reason that I zoomed into this call, is that I want to suggest a number of questions for you folks to address, questions that go beyond the all too many incidents that have been recounted. And I think the threshold question is, what definition of racism are you going to use? Does intent matter, or does only disparate impact matter, which is the principle that Kendi advances? For those of us who are trying to become better people, I think we need to figure out what is the cause of people's discriminatory feelings. Are we born with an instinct to prefer the similar and dislike the different? And if we are, is there something wrong with that? And how can that be changed? I don't know that recounting a lot of incidents is going to change a lot of people's feelings. How do stereotypes arise? Is there a difference between noticing differences between people and viewing or treating people as inferior to oneself? Are there cultural differences associated with different races, religions, and national origins? And if so, is it wrong to recognize those without feeling that one is superior to another? And finally, perhaps the most challenging of all, in an affluent community like La Miranda, what privileges legitimately flow from our somewhat capitalistic system, which has perhaps seen more abuses in the last several years than in the past? And what privileges do not legitimately flow from our capitalistic system? to me, these questions that I've outlined are the really hard questions that need to be addressed in order to make real progress. It's easy to condemn the obvious wrongs around us, but to really get inside our own heads, I think takes a lot of hard work thinking about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tiffany, oh, sorry.
Yes.
Could we ask, I know that Nick has submitted previous input to us, and it would be helpful if he is willing to email us that list of questions. They were layered, and so it would be good to have them in writing. Thank you.
I will send them to Susan.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick. You asked a lot of great questions and deep questions all about our conditioning and socialization that happens. I definitely recommend some Jane Elliott for you in terms of thinking about where we learn stereotypes and looking through eugenics and how all of that is. We're dealing with the kind of impact of that still to this day. And it starts with awareness building, and then it continues with learning and unlearning. Thank you.
Okay, we have one more person with their hand up. So if anyone else does want to speak, probably be a good time. Here comes somebody else. Or it'd be a good time to raise your hand. Use the raise the hand function or *9. Joining us now is Ton Hall.
Welcome, Ton. Let us know if we're pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Hi, my name's Ton Hall. And some of you might have already heard my story with my son, Miles Hall. So I was in another meeting and I just was able to jump on. So I did want to just kind of, I didn't even hear what Vivian said. I texted her to find out what she told you guys. So as you know, my son was shot by the Walnut Creek Police Department on June 2nd last year while experiencing a mental health crisis. And our, my main thing is that I made those partnerships with the police officers. I took the trainings. I went above and beyond to ensure safety for my son. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter that, I even had personal relationships with them, with the mental health officer. And then when you're in crisis and you need help, and when I mean crisis, it's not crisis like life-threatening or anything. It wasn't even a crisis that probably even needed the police, but under how the system works is you have to be a danger to yourself, danger to others, gravely ill. But the main thing for us is that we had learned that if there were 3 times within 18 months that there's a potential that we could have gotten conservatorship. So that was our goal, was that, okay, the clock is ticking and here's an opportunity, because it's almost impossible to get a hospitalization when he doesn't want to go. They're like, no, his rights are violated. So this was an opportunity for us then to say, okay, this is our second time. So let's get this hospitalization. So I just want to make people to understand that we were trying to be strategic in the way that we were getting Miles help. There's no way, if I ever thought that he would have been shot that day, that we would have called. But then again, that's my own trusting that somehow I can be living in Walnut Creek and be African-American and have the same rights as other families. And as you see what happened, if you guys see the video, I do encourage you to see it if you haven't, that he wasn't afforded that right. And that's partly because of the implicit bias and because of things that are already innately in people, that Miles, they saw him different and that his life didn't matter as much as somebody else's. So I did want to ask you guys to, go to justiceformileshall.org if you haven't already. We have a lot of your community are buying lawn signs, which I do appreciate. And I've heard that some of them are being taken down. That's going to happen. And that, unfortunately, that has to do with a lot of people who who just aren't as kind. And so, but I did want to just so you guys can see my face and understand that what happened to Miles should have never happened. So thank you.
Thank you, John, for coming on and sharing with us today, and just for everything that you've been doing and advocating, even in this having to lose your son and the hardship of that. And I can't imagine that any day becomes any easier, even with the work that you're doing. But you're right, the biases that exist, the fears, and the system itself, you know, especially with people with disabilities, that there's so much intricacies and red tape of how you're able to get service. And yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's a broken system, but that's what we're working towards, is the non-police response to the mentally ill, which I'm sure Vivian explained to you guys, but that's where we need the pressure from coming from the county and different cities. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, joining our meeting next is Rosie Beghetto.
Welcome, Rosie.
Rosie, will you unmute yourself?
Thank you, Town Council members, for arranging this meeting and for offering the Town of Lafayette the space to share vulnerable stories that might not have otherwise been allowed to be shared. I grew up in Moraga, and I was othered or forced to feel like I was an outsider, even though I was a citizen and a long-term resident in that town. I returned to Lafayette to build a home with my family, and I am sad to discover that the racism still exists. As a sociologist, I'm keenly aware of the systemic racism that is prevalent in our neighborhood. And I have worked, or have tried to work as much as I can within my community to advocate for vulnerable people like myself, who have experienced disabilities, who have experienced gender, sexism, and so many other complications due to walking multiple roles in life. So I never thought I would have to talk to my child of what to do when the police pulls him over, or how to avoid being targeted because of his mixed race identity. And as I hear the stories emerging from parents who have lost their children due to violence and police brutality, it's concerning for me that I will have these conversations and will always have to consider the welfare of my child in a system that I was raised to believe would protect me. I am hopeful that in this collaboration and the commitment that we have made together as a town and with our school district, we will be able to eradicate, if not all, because that is a very high expectation, we will be able to offer our community racial healing, as I have finally been able to experience through my own self-work and through the allyship of my friends, my neighbors, and my professors. I wish this for the rest of the community, and I thank you for your commitment to helping make this happen.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you for sharing your wishes of racial healing with the Lafayette community and beyond, and your story and experience both growing up in Lafayette and coming back here from Moraga in that case. And we appreciate your sentiments.
At this point, we don't have any any speakers lined up. So if you do wish to speak, please use the raise your hand function on your screen. Or if you're on the phone, you can hit *9. Okay, with that, we have Lynn McMichael. She'll be joining us now.
Welcome, Lynn.
Oh, you can't hear me. Thank you. Thanks so much for doing this meeting. It just warms my heart because I love this town so much. And just having this aired is so important for all of us. But right after we had that wonderful rally in Lafayette a few weeks ago, after George
Floyd.
did, I came home and I made up some signs, Black Lives Matter. And then because I live on a hill off of Happy Valley Road, way up in the hills, I could look at myself driving past the sign, but I wanted to make it more visible. So I went up and down Happy Valley and Upper Happy Valley Road. And I knocked on people's doors and asked them if they would mind me putting a sign up and where I should put it. And of the 10 people I asked, 9 approved it and said, sure, put it up, which was very heartening. Within 2 days, they had all been torn down. And I'm just telling you this because I think the issues you're raising go to a much broader question. And that is, how do we get to know each other and diversify our community? And I think it was Jeremy Levine who spoke earlier, the young man who talked about housing. And that's where we, I think, have to start, right at house, so people who work here can live here and have a decent place to live instead of commuting very far. And then if we could get those folks and their children into the schools, I know it's going to take a long time and it's a sort of broad view, but I think we really need to start there and diversifying our police force. So I just wanted to make mention a couple of those things. Thank you very much again for doing this. Bye.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for sharing your suggestions and for sharing those posters with the rest of the community, and also helping to enforce, both of the suggestions. She went off the screen, but we're going to thank her anyway, around diversifying police force and also housing. I know there's a lot of comments on that within the Tell Your Story about teachers not being able to, who work and teach in Lafayette and not being able to afford housing here. So thank you, Lynn, wherever you are out there.
We don't have any public speakers at this stage. So if there is anyone that does want to make a comment or share a story, please use the raise your hand function or hit *9. We'll give it a minute and see. Okay, we have Andrea Delago Olson who will be joining us now.
Welcome, Andrea.
Hi.
Hi.
I wasn't planning on saying anything. I just wanted to silently observe. But I do want to thank my husband. He sent in a comment. His name's Emil Delgado Olson, and it was about our children and my background, our background, and growing up in Lafayette and our experiences. So I do want to acknowledge and thank him for that. I love our community. I love the friends and family members who are here. We have close-knit ties. We've been here for almost 20 years. But on the flip side of that, there's some hardships coming from a Native background. And it hits extremely close to home with my tribe. And I know it wasn't done out of malice, it was done with good intentions, but not including Miwok people in the things that are being done is hurtful. And it took me a little while. I'm in a good place with my healing and have reached out to my elders and my community and my tribe. And I'm in a good space now where I can talk and be comfortable with sharing my experiences and my traditions and desire to reconnect, and have reached out to the Lafayette Community Garden and have collaborated with them on the Miwok Village, and hopefully with the Thule house being rebuilt coming up, and a mural that is planned for the city of Lafayette to recognize the Maidu tribes. I'm also Maidu on my great-grandfather's side. So I just want to acknowledge and recognize and thank you all. And I hope to be a valuable asset along with my community members who I've reached out to and have shared my experiences, good and bad, mostly good, and just start that reconciliation, you know, and to really start proper education without having to re-educate people. You know, we get looks like, oh, you weren't eradicated, you know, you're still here. Like, yes, you know, we survived the genocide. And it's, you know, California natives, we were hunted during the gold rush. So, but that's not a history that we teach young kids, which I understand it's not appropriate, but there are ways to teach at an appropriate, age-appropriate level. So I've come in and I've spoken at the Lafayette Elementary School in my daughter's class and taught about acorns and how they provide our livelihood and basket weaving and things like that. So I'm really hoping to do more of that for the community, you know, on a whole. So thank you again. And Susan, great to see you. AJ says hi. AJ Donanelli was friends with your son. So he's peeked on the webinar and saw you and says hello. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Okay, joining the meeting now is Heidi Plum.
Welcome, Heidi.
Hello. I also wasn't planning to talk, but I'm just gonna, that was so beautiful. What Andrea just said was so lovely. My name is Heidi Plum. Actually, it's Heidi Rollman Plum. I live in the house my parents bought in 1962. I now own it with my husband and son. I left when I graduated Acalanes High School, was not planning to come back, and in large part because of the diversity. I lived in San Francisco, thought I would stay there forever. Things happen. Good choice. My son was in first grade when we moved back, but I am mostly coming on here to say I am so grateful that this is happening, that this is opening the door to my suburban lifestyle dream, if you know what I mean. That phrase that got used in a very racist way. This is my suburban lifestyle dream, and that I've been waiting for happening here in Lafayette. And I'm so, so grateful. And I'm grateful for all this that's happening. I guess the two things I wanted to say in regards to hearing all this stuff about signage and signage being taken down, it seems like there's an action that could happen with this. Yes, it's just a sign, but it's a sign that could open up dialogue, and the dialogue feels to me like something that helps to shift gears. And so if this task force wanted to come up with some sort of, you know, whatever the Lafayette branding of that task force is, that we can then put in ours. And if they get taken down, then we have that discussion or whatever, but that gives us this opportunity, but also maybe allows other people to understand that there are a lot of people that are welcoming in this community. So that's my one idea. My second idea, and this is, I was thinking of it before, but it was reminded of it when I don't know if it's Andrea or Andrea, who was just on. Been in a lot of different meetings recently where the first thing they do and part of it's been environmental justice meetings where the first thing they do is honor and thank the land that this meeting is taking place on. Now, I know we're in a lot of different places, but we can do that about Lafayette. And I think that that's one step, just making that step at the beginning of every city council, city meeting, and honoring that just, again, starts to turn the gears towards a recognition of the broader community. So that's all I'm coming on. Thank you for doing this. I'm glad you hired a facilitator or Tiffany here to help guide things along, who clearly has a lot of experience, and it's awesome. So thank you. I look forward to the continued work.
Thank you, Heidi. Appreciate your both two tangible suggestions. Yep.
All right, if anyone does care to provide a comment or share their story, please use your the raise the hand function or *9. Okay, joining us now will be Camilla Weeks.
Welcome, Camille.
Hi, thank you for, sorry, I'm getting feedback here. Okay. I'm so sorry, this feedback.
That's okay.
If you mute the YouTube, if you mute the YouTube, if you're watching the YouTube, if you mute the YouTube, that helps.
Or turn down the volume of the YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm good. Sorry for the delay.
No worries.
So
you're muted.
Unmute yourself.
About my experience living here for 11 years. My feeling, our family's feeling, we came here before we had kids, intended to live in Oakland, but work brought us east of the tunnel. So it's generally a feeling of people, our family's African American, both my husband and I. It's mostly been a feeling that people always look at us like we don't live here. They tend to treat us like we don't belong. Sometimes it's a feeling of invisibility, either with people actively not making eye contact or not looking at you, or people not speaking to you and including you, because I think that you just get perceived as an outsider. And so it's, there's that comment, but then there's also, and that's just like a cultural issue of this community not being particularly welcoming to people of color. And I think that the other point I wanted to make about the housing is that there's a lot of people of color who can afford to live here as things are right now, and would have been able to live here and raise their families here and enjoy the schools and the scenery. But most of them, and I've happened to notice that a lot of graduates I know from Berkeley and Stanford wouldn't move out here because they have a feeling, they have knowledge and they know like the local communities, and they purposely stay in Oakland or Berkeley and they raise their families there. They'd rather pay for private school so that they can have their kids around raise their kids in a healthy emotional environment. So, as we live here, we have to actively fight to protect our kids' mental health and be very careful about who we allow them to socialize with so that they are not damaged at a young age. We have to be very protective about their self-image and just about what kind of messages they receive living here. It's just very different than being able to live somewhere where there's lots of diverse people. So I think if the community changes its image, and like if it brings cultural festivals here and things that, and it just brings people of color here for events, then the area will start to feel more welcoming and more diverse people would be interested in living here because the schools are highly rated. I think that, you know, all the schools here in the community would greatly benefit from having more diverse people move here as well. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your just feelings and the impressions that you get being in Lafayette, and the importance of celebrating different cultures and races and religions and all of that to bring that part of the life at Lafayette.
Okay, so if you'd like to join the conversation and provide public comment or tell your story, you can do so now. Raise your hand or use *9. Okay, Tiffany, looks like we don't have any hands raised.
That's impeccable timing because we had planned until 7:55. So Suzanne, if you would like to close and kind of share our next steps.
Sure. So my nephews, they got afraid, and so they didn't call in. I invited them to come to the protest with me, and they wouldn't come then either. And so I get it. I understand it. I'm going to get their stories and get them onto the line, but I do want to share with you guys one of the ones that I heard that was deeply troubling. And if you could imagine this happening to your own children, you would be out of your heads. So they were a sophomore, a 7th, and a 6th grader in our Lafayette schools. And they were walking along Mount Diablo Boulevard with some of their friends after school. And there was a fight that started at the Quick Stop. You know, the Quick Stop's on, oh shoot, that was the name of the road, but it's down below, right? So they were way up here on the street, and the fight happened between 2 white kids in front of the Quick Stop. As soon as they saw that fight happen, they knew they were in trouble because they were Black. They were the only Black people around. And so what did they do? They ran to the library. So our lovely, amazing library, and they ran in and they hid in the back of the library. They had nothing to do with this fight, but they were just witnesses and ran. And what happened? The Lafayette police ran in after them, dragged them out to the middle of the hallway, threw them on their faces, and handcuffed them in the Lafayette library and took them into custody. It took my sister until about midnight to get them out, even though they were not even involved. And I'm just like, and I only heard the story about 2 years ago. They didn't even tell me. I'm like, it would never happen to one of our children. I mean, it just never happened. And they knew it. They knew it instantly. And so the stories that's just one. And so I will fill with more. And so, yes, it's here. And the policing here is, they still don't stop in Lafayette, because typically when they do, police show up. If they're stopped in the gas station waiting for directions, they've had 3 police cars surround them. And that was 2 years ago. So it's here, and it's unfortunate. And so we really, really do need to look at that stuff. Anyway, so that's, sorry, why I get so passionate about this. Anyways, and we were not going to take any actions, but I do want to talk about one other issue. I was hoping that Adam Dolberg was going to come on to the call, and he didn't. I met with him yesterday. Adam's the young kid, 7th grader, who has a BIPOC rock library, a rock garden. And BIPOC was a new term, and I think it's really very appropriate. It's Black, Indigenous people of color. So that could be, maybe a direction we go, and to get the Indigenous people in there as well. So he's had this rock garden that he started, probably a month ago, along the Lafayette Trail. And he puts his rocks out and they're adorable. It's been vandalized 20 times now. And this diligent young man goes back out there and repopulates them. And guess, the only rocks that are missing are the ones that have the word black on them or BLM. All the other ones are fine. And every single time he goes out there, those are the ones that are gone. And every single time he goes back and puts them back. So sent this out, and Jonathan was really, Kotanyagi was really, really wonderful. And we would like to discuss having a BIPOC rock garden at the community center and making it more official. And the thought is that there's a lot of people around and there's a lot of kids around, and hopefully it won't be vandalized. You know, hopefully we can get it to a point where a sign or the rock gardens can exist, and we can help it exist and not be vandalized. So I hope we can bring that back to the council at some point. There'll be a process. I don't know exactly what that'll be, but I'd like to at least start the process here. So thank you. Next steps, like I said before, is we're going to meet with
Pam wants to chime in.
Pam, please, yes, and
Susan.
Teresa too. Yeah.
Susan, yeah, no, I mean, it's an unbelievable story, and he was just a fantastic kid on our first Zoom. But just a procedural question, maybe to Narup. Do we need to bring that back to the council, or can we just execute on that? Sorry. Can we just action it? Do it?
You're muted. You're muted, Narup.
Thank you. As the Vice Mayor said, any recommendation that any thoughts or action items you have to be formulated as recommendations to the full council. If you want to talk about this particular item as a starter, you can make a recommendation tonight and we will put it on the next agenda for you to consider.
So just to get this straight, so every single thing we do, whether it's individually or collectively as a task force, has to wait for 2 weeks for a council meeting. I'm not criticizing. I just want to get the procedure down.
A couple of reasons. I think that was how it was discussed at the last council meeting. That's one. So there is an expectation. And the second is, if it does involve city resources, it's not a budgeted item or something that has already been accounted for, you would need to go back to the full.
Yeah, no, I completely understand the city resources and staffing time. I'm just, maybe I'm talking kind of like this smaller things, I'm thinking of the rocks themselves, which is a great idea. I mean, this is a fantastic idea that Susan had. So, okay, I'll wait for 2 weeks. Thanks.
Thank you. Teresa, do you have any comments?
No, the bureaucracy, we do have to follow it. So
if I can just add, if you can change the rules at the next council meeting, the council can give you the authority to undertake smaller projects and bring the larger projects to them.
You all have the ideas, you all have the power, you make the rules, and then you follow the rules. And before you close, Susan, I know there's been some comments in the Q&A, some questions, and also some folks that wholeheartedly support the rock garden idea. And for those of you who want to continue submitting the stories, please do. The Tell Your Story form will continue to be online. And we chose not to share them out loud today because we didn't want to take up space and share people's stories for them, and also didn't want to be biased in the stories that we chose. But all of the stories are public online for you all to share and review. So.
Okay, Tiffany, there has been a question about how people can access those stories. So do you want to let them know about that?
Sure. I'm going to put Jennifer on the spot.
So when I see that there's some movement on the submission of forms, I'm going in and updating a summary report so that all of the stories can be found in one spot. And then I've been uploading the revised report every day under the agenda for this meeting. So if there's a different place that you would like me to post them, I can do that. But at this point, the plan was that I would just continue posting an updated file under the agenda for this town hall event.
And I'll just note, we will be sharing that in our news publications from the city in the roundup and on the webpage.
Thank you. That's great. Unless does anybody, oh, Teresa, go ahead. Teresa, we never got.
I just happened to see that, and I know we were ending, but I saw that someone had their hand up, but they lowered it. So
thank you. All right, so if that is all from everybody, we're good. Okay, so I'd like to adjourn tonight in memory of John Lewis, American civil rights leader and U.S. representative for Georgia's 5th District. May he rest in peace.
Thank you, Susan.
Welcome. All right, thank you, everybody.